Borders. So what should you know for the week coming up? You should know that Republican vice presidential candidate Paul Ryan considers his vote for the Iraq War foreign policy experience. When Fox News yesterday asked Ryan about, quote, the deficit in the Ryan portfolio foreign policy, here's how Ryan responded.
The way I would say about foreign policy is, I've been in Congress for a number of years. That's more experience than Barack Obama had when he came into office. I've voted to send people to war.
I voted to send people to war. You should know that Ryan's primary claim to foreign policy experience included ignoring the skeptics, later proved right, of cherry-picked intelligence, fueling anti-American sentiment abroad, costing U.S. taxpayers $800 billion, and the death of 4,486 American soldiers, and by some estimates, at least 100,000 Iraqis. You should know that rubber stamping a war does not make you qualified to avoid them. You should know that former New Jersey governor and Wall Street banker John Corzine probably won't be facing criminal charges for his role overseeing the derivatives trading firm MF Global, which managed to lose about $1 billion of its customers' money without any particularly convincing explanation as to where it went. The New York Times reported this week that the federal investigation into the bankrupt firm is winding down with no prosecutions expected. And get this, according to the New York Times, quote, Mr. Corzine, in a bid to rebuild his image and engage his passion for trading, is weighing whether to start a hedge fund, according to people with knowledge of his plans. You should know that post-bailout Wall Street is the definitive refutation of S. Scott Fitzgerald's famous and wrong-headed maxim that there are no second acts in American lives. For the titans of finance, there are more second acts than you can count. As you watch the polling of the presidential race this week, you should know that according to one new poll, if every American in America voted, President Obama would breeze to re-election. According to a survey conducted by Suffolk University and USA Today, the president leads Governor Romney by a stunning margin of 43-14 among the nearly 40% of Americans who are eligible to vote but unlikely to do so. You should know the poll was of people who said they didn't plan on voting or only 50-50 likely to do so. And you should know that among this constituency of the politically disengaged and alienated, the president has a 55% favorability rating compared to 37% unfavorable, while Mitt Romney has a 25% favorable rating compared to 51% unfavorable. You should know the Republican Party understands very, very well that the smaller the electorate, the fewer people who vote, the more likely they are to win. You should know the census will be releasing in-depth poverty figures for 2011 on September 12th, and those figures are expected to show the poverty rate nearing 16%, with more Americans' poverty than any time since 1965. You should know that while all the attention of the Ryan budget focuses on Medicare, it is most savage and cruel in its cuts to programs for the poor. You should know that according to the Senate for Budget and Policy Priorities, fully 62% of the Ryan budget's cuts come from programs for the poor, and you should know that despite that fact, poverty has been almost entirely absent as a topic of the presidential campaign. You should know if you want to stay up to date on the politics and policies of poverty, you can read my colleague Greg Kaufman's indispensable This Week in Poverty Dispatch at thenation.com. I want to find out what my guests think we should know for the week. We will begin with you, Sam.
Well, a couple of weeks ago, the New York Times reported that President Obama was upset that Democrats weren't getting enough credit for being willing to cut Social Security and Medicare. Right. This past week, Vice President Joe Biden said, and I quote, I guarantee you, flat guarantee you, there'll be no changes in Social Security. I flat guarantee you. He told this to a diner, to a patron of a diner in Virginia. So the question going forward, I think people should be watching, is whether or not President Obama attacks Romney Ryan for their plans to destroy Medicare and, frankly, Ryan's plans in the past to destroy Social Security, or whether he attacks them as being impediments to a potential grand bargain down the road. And so from my perspective, I hope that the president calls Ryan Romney out for their attacks on Medicare and Social Security and vows to protect Medicare and Social Security the way the vice president has.
Maya Wiley.
You should know I'm finally taking my kids on vacation. But besides that,
that's awesome.
But one of the things we should know is that we're getting to the end of the month, and that means that 46 million Americans, half of whom are children, will not have food stamp benefits that are going to support them buying groceries through the end of the month. And that's really important to understand when we're having and going to hear more this coming week of this debate about whether we should be cutting these programs or not. We should also know that there are, because of the pushback on people's ability to vote, that there's a tremendous effort underway in local communities in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Florida, Ohio, to make sure people understand whether or not they have the right to vote and if they are, and what they need in order to be able to do that fairly. And that's really critical for people to get engaged with. And everybody's elected officials are home, which means that people should know there are going to be opportunities to go and complain.
Truth.
You should know that there there are more than 350,000 people in the state of Virginia who cannot vote because of felony convictions and who have paid their debt to society, done their time, and that Governor McConnell actually has the power to give them automatic restoration. And you should also know that this week we will know Advancement Project's case in Pennsylvania on voter ID, how quickly the Supreme Court will take up the case.
Michael.
Well, last week we found out that Paul Ryan was one of 128 cash and trash Republicans who, sort of described the stimulus as a wasteful spending spree and then went looking for stimulus money, which struck me as kind of mildly hypocritical. But you should know that he was also one of many Republicans who voted for a $715 billion stimulus plan that was almost identical to the Obama plan. Less green stuff, less money for the arts, but less money for AmeriCorps, more money for Army Corps of Engineers, boondoggles, but otherwise pretty similar to this Sharia socialism.
I want to thank my guests today, Sam Cedar from MajorityReport.fm, Maya Wiley from the Center for Social Inclusion, Judith Brown-Dianis from the Advancement Project, and Michael Grunwald from Time Magazine, author of The New Deal. Thank you all. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back next weekend, Saturday and Sunday at 8 Eastern Time. Our guests will include Joan Walsh from Salon.com, who has a new book out called What's the Matter with White People? Why We Long for a Golden Age That Never Was, and Ta-Nehisi Coates from The Atlantic, who has an incredible, amazing, must-read new essay out about race in the Obama era that you're going to want to check out. Coming up next, Melissa Harris Perry on today's MHP. Paul Ryan was supposed to be the one who brought big ideas into focus in the presidential campaign. So how did the dominant story of the week become Mitt Romney's taxes again? That's Melissa Harris Perry coming up next. We'll see you next week here